2 Corinthians 3. Do we begin again to command ourselves? Or do we need, as some other apostle, a commendation to you as a letter of commendation from you? Here's Paul. And what's been happening is it's believed that a lot of the ones were coming in that were Jewish leaders were coming in, and they were preaching. And they were coming in with commendation letters. It's just like when we go and have a resume, you go and say, I have references. So people call it references, see what's going on. Well, these letters would have been the same thing. If somebody wrote this letter out, they're saying, well, this guy here, he must be a good guy because this guy, they sent us this letter. But the problem was, Paul started the church. He never gave him a commendation letter or anything. All Paul did was come there and speak, and he got him saved. But these other guys are coming in, and they're telling him, you have to follow this, you have to follow that. And they were saying you had to do works. You weren't saved by grace. So he keeps going on in verse 2. You are apostles, written in our hearts, knowing that and reading by all men. Clearly you are an apostle of Christ, ministry by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of flesh, that is of our hearts. He tells them, look at your heart. You guys, hasn't your hearts changed? Hasn't your lives changed? How can you tell a good pastor from a bad pastor? Is it by the head knowledge they have? It's by the lives they change, isn't it? I mean, it's going to get as a pastor, if you go get ordained, doesn't mean you're going to be a good pastor. The way you tell a good pastor is by what their fruit is. I mean, that's where you tell. If the fruit's bad, then what kind of pastor do you have? That's the way you tell. And he's telling them it's by what's in your heart. You have to see what the changes are. Are they changing? Because they were going by what was put in the Ten Commandments and that. And he says the tablets, what were the Ten Commandments wrote? They were to show us how bad we were, weren't they? And what do we do with our Christian walk? Do we make mistakes? But it's to show us that we need to change to be closer to God. But we're not saved by the works, are we? No. We're saved by grace. And then he keeps going on, verse 4. And we have such trust through Christ towards God. Not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think of anything as being from ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God, who also made us sufficient as ministries of the new covenant, not of a letter by the Spirit, for the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. But ministry of death, written engraved on stones, was glorious, that the children of Israel could not look steadily at the face of Moses because of the glory of his countenance, which the glory was passed away. Here he is, he's telling us we're not saved by our works. We're saved by the Spirit. And that should be sufficient for us. How many people want to go out and prove how good of a Christian they are? They think by works, isn't it? We're not saved by works. No. And what does works do? We're just looking at what the covenant says.
Works are good, but that's all they are.
Well, there's nobody who can follow all, are they? None of us can. So what does it do? It shows you there's really no hope in it, is there? It doesn't mean we go out and just sin because we want to, but it means we follow what he tells us. And then he gets, then he starts about Moses. And Moses, whenever he came off the mountain, he had the glow, didn't he? And he covered himself with the veil. So this is where he's coming out. He says, in verse 8, how will the ministry of the Spirit not be more glorious? For the ministry of condemnation had glory. The ministry of righteousness exceeds much more in glory. For even what was made glorified has no glory in this respect, because of the glory that exists. For if what is passed away was glorious, what remains is much more glorious. So here he is, he's covering his head because he's lost that glory, isn't he? He didn't want the people to know. We don't have to worry about a veil, do we? The glory should be shown through us. We shouldn't have to hide our head, should we? And he says by our ministry, we glorify. And we're righteous and see much more glory. So we don't have to hide her and under a veil anymore, do we? Not like Moses did. And then you keep going in verse 12. Therefore, since we have such hope, we use great boldness of speech. Unlike Moses, who put the veil over his face so that the children of Israel could not look steadily at the end of what was passing away. But we have great boldness in speech. We don't show people, we speak for God, don't we? And how do you get them saved?
We're supposed to.
We're supposed to share the gospel, aren't we? Our speech is what gives us our glory, don't it? How many of us take the time to actually go out and minister to somebody? Show them that glory. Everybody should be doing that. It shouldn't just be a small part of the church doing it. But in verse 14 it says, but their minds were blinded, for until the day the same veil remains unlifted in the reader of the Old Testament, because the veil is taken away in Christ. But even to those days when Moses is read, a veil lies on their hearts. Nevertheless, when one turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. So the veil, when we accept Christ, it's taken away, isn't it? Now, the Jewish people still have to wear a veil? They do, because they're still under the law. Us as Christians, when the Lord died, the veil was taken away, wasn't it? What was happening to the veil? They said the veil got split in half, didn't it? Mm-hmm. That veil was taken away. But the Jewish people still wear the veil, because that veil, unless you accept Christ, it's not taken away yet, is it? It's still there. That's why they can't see sometimes what we see in the Lord. But then it says in verse 17, now the Lord is a spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But we all, with unveiled faces, behold as a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image with the glory to glory, just as the Spirit of the Lord. He talks about here about the Spirit of the Lord, but he says, behold, in a mirror, the glory of the Lord. So we should be a mirror of it, shouldn't we? When you look in a mirror, what do you see? You see your reflection, don't you? Well, we should be seeing the reflection of God in our lives. How many of us, this is a struggle every day, because if you get fired up during the day, is that showing God? We have times when we don't show it, don't we? Our life is supposed to be a mirror. We're supposed to be the mirror of God. When that veil has been lifted, so the Lord's glory shows through us. And with that mirror, it should be showing God's Spirit through us, shouldn't it? So Paul here, he's trying to tell them, because they think just because he hasn't had commendations, he hasn't had people write letters about who he was to come. They were all saying, man, he can't be an apostle. But then he says, why did your life change? Why did you see the change in your life? You should be seeing a change. It shouldn't be like these guys are coming in and they're telling them you have to spend all your time obeying the law. And what happens when you're so worried about obeying the law? Can you actually show God? Usually you get so strict, you get so... It's like trying to explain it, it's like sometimes when you have to follow so many rules, can you really live? We're saved by grace. And this glory should show through our life. We should be showing Christ. We should be that mirror. And that should be what's for every one of us here. Go to prayer.